I just want to say a bit more about moral purity, which is one of the 5 underlying principles of morality, according to this video by Jonathan Haidt, which again I'll put in the info box. It's only one of the 5. The other 4 are a concern for caring, a concern for reciprocity or fairness, in-group loyalty, deference to authority. And they take care of a lot of morality. But this last one, purity, I think is a particularly interesting one, because it's obviously based upon a metaphor. There's nothing kind of physiologically or naturalistically impure about a lot of the things that we have moral problems with. And yet there is this sense of purity. We talk about feeling dirty, or we talk about being sullied. The language around that is all around morality. A lot of the language around morality is about those kinds of conditions, about purity and contamination or toxicity. And in fact a lot of the gestures and the body language around it is the same. I've watched a lot of videos on YouTube and just a lot of news items on TV, that kind of thing. And a lot of the expressions that people make when they're talking about something that they feel is morally questionable, even things like homosexuality, that's the most common one actually. There's a very particular look on people's faces, even, which I think, and I'll try and get to this in this video, is about is reflective of a purity metaphor being enacted at the level of facial expression and body language. But this purity thing, it must be a metaphor, as I say, because most, it's a metaphor. But where does it come from? I think it comes from a concern for the purity or the safeness, the quality of things like food and water supplies. And I suppose I'm reminded of this because of the thing in Haiti, which is just a dreadful disaster, but it's been listened to on the news, and a lot of the water supplies are very contaminated. But purity is very important to us as an embodied concept in terms of food and water supplies. And we have a lot of somatosensory mechanisms for detecting the quality, the safeness of water supplies and the safeness of food supplies, and a lot of mechanisms for dealing with food and water supplies which are not safe or which have not been safe over evolutionary time. The gag reflex, the disgust reflex, is a lot of that is about protecting the body from potentially damaging contaminants in water supplies or food supplies. So if we drink something and our taste mechanism determines that it's been contaminated, quite often we gag. So we do this weird thing with our mouth and our nose wrinkles up, and we try to evacuate the substance, literally evacuate it. We vomit the toxic, noxious substance up, because we've recognised that this, what should be a nourishing, satisfying experience, contains a toxin. It isn't a pure substance, it's a contaminated substance. And that completely authentic, if you like, completely embodied response seems to be being mobilized as a metaphor for other kinds of things that we have not physical responses to, not that we find, not that are literally physically disgusting and that they provoke the disgust reflex in order to protect our bodies, but are mobilized in a metaphorical sense to reflect on things that we consider immoral, even though they don't have that same potential value to poisonous. So, for example, a lot of people, when they're talking about things that they find morally reprehensible, even things like homosexuality, if you look carefully, you can see their faces reenacting the disgust reflex. They'll do the little gag reflex, or they'll do the nose wrinkling up reflex, which is part of that disgust reflex, as if they're trying to at least represent the evacuation of a toxic substance from their body. So the purity of the Yet they obviously don't consider the idea pure. They don't consider the idea of homosexuality in that case as free from toxins. And so they're going through this evacuation process to get rid of the apparent contaminant, even though in that case the contaminant is just an idea. It's just a concept. It's not. There's nothing physical about it. Yeah. So I think this purity, the purity of an idea, which is potentially contaminated by other ideas, must originate, I think, in the through this metaphor of contamination of physical substances through alien substances, which are potential toxins. I think that's right. I think it shows up covertly in some of the language as well. So, I mean, some of the comments on one of my videos referred to moral choices as often being black and white. And that's experientially how it feels, of course. And I'm not saying that's necessarily incorrect. Most of the time it isn't incorrect. But the fact that we're using terms like black and white, or we're saying things like the moral choice should be clear to anyone, I mean, that's part of the same metaphor. We associate clarity with purity in the most literal sense, something you can see through. We assume whiteness with light, which is revealing and which aids to clarity and aids to the simple identification of the purity of a substance, as opposed to the potential disguising of toxins and contaminants. So I think those same metaphors are in play when we use other terms. And I think we have to kind of get behind the terminology that we're using and see what the deep underlying principles are. And as I say, I think that in all of those cases, it's the morality of purity which is being mobilised. That's the metaphor that's being mobilised, and that metaphor originates in a fully embodied response to alien contaminants.